You are listening to My Little Narcissist. I'm the host, Lyra Stone, and I am here to talk to you all about abuse recovery and ways in which you can start to live a abuse-free life, free of flashbacks, free of trauma, and start to kind of regrow, regenerate after what has been a lot of terrible conditionings in your life from a person or persons who have violated your sovereignty and caused you a lot of pain, be it verbally, physically, emotionally, sexually, etc. I have been going through my own recovery path for a little over a year now, and it has been a lot of ups and downs, and I have been trying to practice mindfulness, etc., especially as we are going through COVID, which arguably is its own kind of mental health crisis. But this is kind of a way I have been working on my own self-help. I hope that this podcast can help other people who are suffering from much of the same things. And I just want to offer some tips and some guidance and advice that I've picked up through my progress and growth to kind of maybe help encourage you or help you on your journey. Because while there is a kind of universality to what happened to us, there is also very much an individuality to it as well. No one can know your story or tell your story like you can. And so much of what happens in abuse is a very difficult situation, even years after the events. You can still find yourself at a loss for words or finding yourself in a very difficult place as far as communicating just what it was like or how it happened. Victims of abuse, one of the reasons we don't come forward or we don't speak about it, or when we do, it's a little convoluted or strange to others, is because abuse is really about guilt and about shame. Any abuser is going to project onto you their own problems and their own issues. And while you may be trying everything you can think of to salvage a relationship, to express love, to openly communicate, to break free of toxic cycles, they are only ever going to continue those cycles, continue to confuse you, and continue to berate and use you. Because ultimately, when you're especially dealing with someone who is narcissistic or an actual narcissist or sociopath, etc., cluster B, they're never going to work on themselves, and they're never going to acknowledge what is happening to you as relevant or worthy, because in their minds you have no sovereignty. You are not allowed individuality or rights of your own. Everything is centric to them. And so coming out of abuse, oftentimes people suffer from very low self-esteem, a sense of loss as to who they are. And this can take a while to regenerate, especially if you've been conditioned, like we all have, to sort of prioritize the abuser and make your world their world. And while you may not have had issues of codependency before entering the relationship, you very likely, if not very certainly, do have issues of codependency now that you're out. And establishing healthy boundaries and learning how to self-love and self-heal can take some time and some real effort and work on your end. There's no easy way to do it. And while there can be wonderful relationships in your life, wonderful supportive people who have you, in the end, it's your responsibility to try and find ways to create new pathways in your brain towards how you speak to yourself, towards how you even address your traumas, because you've had an exterior voice for a very long time, probably, telling you the worst things a person could probably tell another person about themselves. And because of the layering in of guilt, of shame, of unworthiness that comes from being so very much emotionally neglected, in lieu of taking care of a very dysregulated, disordered, criminal person, it'll take a while for you to even quite know how to find those tools for your own salvation. And one of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of recovery, I was actually thinking about that terrible, well, I shouldn't say terrible, that's a judgment call. I was thinking about that movie with Julia Roberts in it. I know there was a book as well. I had never got around to reading it, but I did watch the movie called Eat, Pray, Love. And, the movie was centric to a woman who has been divorced and just trying to kind of reclaim herself. And she gets into another relationship that, causes her problems. And then she sort of goes on a pathway to self-discovery. And, in some ways the movie is a bit problematic simply because this woman is some kind of travel writer who seems to have an infinite amount of resources and income, which isn't very practical for most persons in the world. Most of us do not have the ability to, travel around for several years or a year even to places like Italy or, Bali and go, meditate in an ashram in India or whatever the case is. Like, that's not a very feasible thing for us to do to kind of recover from the pain of what has happened. However, I do like the concept of Eat, Pray, Love because it does kind of centralize a very important theme, which is as we rediscover our individuality outside of something that took a lot from us, learning how to enjoy pleasure and learning how to be mindful and learning how to self-regulate, to love ourselves and to seek out healthy relationships is a process that we can find through things like food, spirituality, and of course, love itself. And I was thinking about various ways that we could do that, even if we don't have an infinite income. Because, I think that we can sometimes, especially coming out, be very defeatist in our language towards ourselves and our attitudes towards our lives. There's a lot of helplessness. There's a lot of, just how I was so betrayed. I'm so alone. How can I ever find any value to myself when the person who I tried for so long to offer value back to me after I gave him or her so much value, it never happened. It never came. And then they just kind of threw me away. And now I just feel like this is almost something I deserve or something that, defines me. And so there can be a lot of helplessness there, and there can be a lot of feelings of unworthiness of any pleasure in life. And so I was kind of thinking about ways that even persons who are, on a fixed income or have, a limited time, how they could still practice ways to reconnect to basically happiness and life. Because there are so many amazing opportunities out there if we reach for them. And that can be hard when you are battling with depression or anxiety. But, large journeys, big progresses, they start with little steps. And a little step could be something as simple as taking a day trip, for example. Like, I really can't afford, even if coronavirus wasn't impeding me, to go to another country somewhere in another part of the world and, decompress and process my pain there. But I know I can go try something else in somewhere nearby. And even with COVID restrictions, there are ways to do that. Like, I always find it surprising how so many of us spend so much money on these trips to, really popularized areas in like Disney World in Florida or maybe San Francisco or Hawaii or Puerto Rico or someplace like that. And we spend so much money and time going to these places when in fact there can be so many interesting and fulfilling spots just down the road from us. And I know that a lot of us maybe don't recognize or see the beauty to our own areas, but each area has its own merit. And while we might feel maybe bored with living in the mountains or living by the beach or living in more of a valley, hilly area, other people might consider where we are paradise and might consider where we are a beautiful and amazing setting to explore. And sometimes just shifting our perspective to like re-loving or reintroducing ourselves to the very picturesque qualities of things around us can do wonders for our mental health. I myself live in the mountains, and they're very beautiful, and lots of people could argue that they're the prettiest mountains in the world, or at least I could, because I do love these mountain ranges. But if you live once you're with something for a very long time, sometimes you can kind of just become numb to it or shrug to it and be like, well, I see it every day. But taking a small day trip to a town right beside your own and finding something of value in that town can do wondrous things for you. Even if you make a trip make an adventure out of something small, like I really want to find a new rocking chair. I need a rocking chair for my front patio area, and I don't really want to go to, a chain store. I want to go find a good one, a real one, a one with a story. And, oh, I know of this place that's 40 miles away from here that has some really cute antique stores. And I'm going to go make a day trip and find a rocking chair. And, sometimes just making a simple mission like that on a Saturday or a Sunday can be, a way of sort of recharging you and reigniting you, because you're doing something for yourself and something that doesn't require a whole lot of money and something that doesn't require a whole lot of travel. And it can kind of re-engage the parts of you that feel confident and can kind of push away some of that helplessness and some of that depression by just getting out and having mobility again. And so my eat, pray, love advice for those that are, regular humans is don't think that you can't live the Julia Roberts lifestyle because of getting over your trauma and abuse because of income. There are still ways to get outside of an area, outside of a triggering space, if you kind of just shift it into a more positive, more future-oriented perspective. And I often think about small things like really like self-care, taking a moment outside of a scarcity mindset. A lot of us experienced financial abuse when we were with our narcissists or our abusers. Because our narcissists, our abusers, they were very controlling, and they had to control every aspect of our lives. And so when you're dealing with somebody who won't even let you use your own money or each other's money to do anything outside of what they want, that can cause you to get into a bit of a scarcity mindset, this mindset of, oh, well, I better not spend this on me. I have to spend it on somebody else, or I have to spend it on a worthy cause, or I have to save it. And it, of course, it's important to save money, and it's always important to be responsible. Another big problem with narcissistic persons is they tend to, while controlling you, not pay a lot of attention to their incomes. Mine was a very stingy man, incredibly stingy, miserly to a fault. One of the comments that people would make would be kind of that characteristic about him. But also on a completely different hand, while he would put all that pressure kind of on me, there was just a lot of, oh, we can't spend that, we can't do that, for like basic household items, for things that were completely necessary. He, on the other hand, would then go out and drop $6,000 on a new trail bike or a really awesome kayak, like the toys. And, really they were toys for him, like ways to gain more supply, ways to gain more attention. They were all self-oriented, and he only ever had arguments or reasons for purchasing those because they made sense to him. And anything outside of that, well, that's just ludicrous. But I'm being a little redundant. We all know how selfish people operate and how there's really no logic or, in some ways, financial responsibility involved with them because they do act so much on their own selfish impulses. But we don't have to worry about being like that per se. There is, of course, problems with abuse of money when we feel that, if we get into a vice cycle or an addiction cycle, we're like, well, if I buy this, I'll feel better, the shopaholic mindset. And while that's not healthy, what is healthy is saying to yourself, I've earned some money, and I have a right, a worthiness to use that money to give myself things that my soul, my body, my mind might need, and at the very least enjoy. Because learning how to enjoy things again is half the battle. So many of us, I know for me, gosh, I all the things I enjoyed towards the end because of the relentless assaults and abuse, I couldn't enjoy them anymore. I almost felt like I had to ask permission to enjoy things. And one could argue that's definitely a responsibility of my own. How could I have gotten to such a state where even reading my favorite book felt like something I had to ask permission for? But it definitely spoiled a lot of the things that used to give me pleasure. And now I'm reintroducing myself to that pleasure. And I will go into on a different podcast ways to really give yourself pleasure again, and how you can go into that mentally, so to speak, because reconnecting to enjoyment and happiness and fueling yourself is so vitally important, and not caring or making it so much of a focus about other people and what they need, but instead focusing on your own needs and focusing on what's going to regenerate you. And anyway, like using some of your earned money to take that small day trip and go find that rocking chair is one method. Another method would be designating a space or a time to find a new dish or a new food item that maybe you've always wanted to try or you've always been curious about, and really kind of enjoying the sensation of that new experience. There are always neat local restaurants, neat like cuisines out there. I live in the States. Probably most of the people I'm talking to are in the States. And the States, because it is such a vast melting pot of so many different persons from so many different cultures around the world, we have a plethora of amazing food options. And going out and having an adventure and learning more about kind of what is available in our communities in terms of sustenance can be such a exciting and freeing thing. And it doesn't have to be as costly as one might think. Just spending maybe, dedicating a month or two to even a foodie theme, like of trying different pizza parlors out could be fun. Be like, you know what? I tried this one pizza place out and they did California style. Now I want to try this other pizza place. They do more New York style. Oh, this one's more Chicago style. Oh, this one has all sorts of quirky toppings and ingredients. Oh, and this one has a theme. There's usually a bunch of pizza parlors out there, and some of them can be really intriguing. And so you could just literally spend a month trying out new pizza. I know that a lot of people really want, like they're afraid, they're isolated. A lot of them feel like, oh goodness, I'm so lonely. How will I meet new people? Or how will I find new ways to connect to others? And I know that solo trips can be scary, and I don't know your circumstance. You might have children or you might have a group of friends. But even if it is solo, and I would argue that even if you do have children or friends, you yourself are an individual. You are, a solo person. Even, in relationships, we should always be mindful of the fact that we are our own sovereign entity. We have complete autonomy separate from everyone and everything. And kind of reminding of ourselves of that, kind of universal truth can sometimes help us then be able to recognize what we want and what would actually be exciting for us. Because when you spend so long, kind of, remember the classic, regular relationship problem, which is, where do we go to eat? Oh, I don't know, honey, whatever you want. Well, if I, and then in the end, it can be very passive aggressive, and there's a lot of uncertainty, mostly because, I think the joke is men make joking about women, is women are afraid to vocalize what they want, and so they have to do it in indirect ways. Although it doesn't have to be genderized, it could just be the individuals themselves and how their relationship works. But vocalizing what you want and going after what you want is not a sin. It's not a bad trait. What the narcissistic person or abuser did, that was because they took whatever they wanted without any conscience or remorse or even acknowledgement of the other people in their lives. But separating yourself from their behaviors versus what is a normal human behavior is very important. And again, I always say that one of the first things we need to do when we're out is to learn to be more selfish, because most of us, if not all of us, in some ways, I mean, it depends on how it worked with you. I suppose if you were living in a lot of resistance, you may have been like super pushy about your individuality and your rights in the end. You might have been a little over like me, just to kind of counterbalance their me. But a lot of us are usually like not very able to just say, this is what I want. This is what I want to get. This is what's going to make me happy. This is what I'm craving. This is what I know is going to make like me heal a bit. I want to see a waterfall. I want to, smell, freshly mowed grass. I want to do whatever it is. And then proactively seeking it and proactively saying, hey, I want these things. And it doesn't even have to, yes, I suppose all of us go into fantasy modes. Like for me, usually when I'm trying to find my happy place, I'll kind of envision myself. Usually I think I would say out in Wyoming or Montana. I love Yellowstone. I love the Tetons. And I usually will envision myself somewhere around there with the smell of sage and with this like just beautiful landscape and the bison. And it's just like, and the geysers, it's gorgeous. There's a certain energy to it. And so I sometimes will imagine myself there. But again, that might not be financially viable for a lot of us unless we live in that area, of course. So in the interim, we can make compromises with our desires and be like, well, I may not be able to see a geyser, but I did go on my GPS and I went into Google and I noticed that there's a hot spring and it's only an hour and a half away from here. And this hot spring is available to the public, limited options. I can go there and I can go soak in a hot spring and kind of have something that's comparable or similar to what I might be craving. And hot springs would be a great example of something that can be very cathartic and healing. I love going to hot springs. And I know, unfortunately, for a lot of us, especially if we were with our abuser for a relatively long time, a lot of our trips are tied to our abusers. And we would go to these places with our abusers. And that's something I'm struggling with as well. But that usually just requires an extra step. Because what I had to start doing that I was practicing with my therapist, etc., was taking memories of a place. We'll take a place that has a hot spring, and because we would go to a place that had a hot spring. And when I visited in my mind, or I visit it literally physically, say I go there, I try not to let my memories of this person supersede my desire to make new ones, and also my connection to it as an individual person. Like, the saddest part to being in abuse is the kind of what we always knew but could never face the truth of, which is why oftentimes it's very hard to get out. And that is, we were alone anyway. There was no point where that person was actually celebrating that situation with you, not in the ways that I think you would have liked them to, or in the ways that you were. And so when you have this, like, in some ways, distorted memory of you and this person happy together or enjoying a moment together, if you really sit with it for a long time and if you're just firm with yourself, you'll probably recall the actual events and that person wasn't really present. That person wasn't really enjoying that hike with you or, enjoying that hot tub with you. They were probably consumed with their own things, their own issues, their own thoughts. They may have been sexually abusive during that trip, verbally abusive. They probably had very little to do with any positive experiences you've, unfortunately, any positive experiences you had. And so, like with any memory, usually over time, what's great about time is the bad stuff can often fade. And then you're left with the good stuff. But I know with abuse, it can be so hard because of cognitive dissonance and brainwashing, we'll often attribute some of the good stuff with them, or even say they were a part of the good stuff. But again, I would argue that that's probably more unlikely than you may think, because your grief is making you kind of latch on to false memories. false impressions. And so taking them completely out of the picture as gently as you can, and leaving solely yourself in there, or maybe the persons that aren't connected to this person, like in there, say you went with some friends or relatives. And then you can kind of no longer be triggered all the time with these floods of new memories. Or if you do have them, because sometimes, you really can only control your brain so much, and sometimes it is important to go through grieving processes. When you do have that grieving moment of, like with me, if I were going to the hot spring area, of going to a favorite bridge of mine where there's a lot of butterflies, and I always like to climb down into the water and sort of walk around. I might turn over some stones and try to catch some crawdads, because I'm a bit of a country girl. And, it can be very sad for me because, he would be tied into that. He would be with me in that memory. He would be maybe somewhere off in like the distant shore, plotting out something or typing on his phone or taking a picture. And so I have to kind of sit with the grief of that ghost. But I also can use that time to feel that grief and kind of change it, so to speak, into maybe a bittersweetness, maybe a nostalgia, but also a message to myself of empowerment and strength, because you can kind of almost be like, gosh, isn't it great? I no longer have to be in this beautiful scenery with a person who was so damaging to me. And this might be a bit of an interesting strategy to do, but I know for a friend of mine who was trying to quit cigarettes, she was like, oh, I have to quit cigarettes. Terrible, horrible, things. It's bad for my health. I'm trying so hard, but gosh, it's hard. She told me that one of the ways she was able to do it was whenever she picked up a cigarette to smoke it, she would think in her mind, like all the times that she got really sick off of like nicotine, like too much nicotine. Anybody that's had nicotine poisoning knows that it is a nasty feeling. It makes your stomach sick, makes you want to throw up. Anybody that smoked too long throughout a night, like they might have difficulty breathing. They might feel out of breath. They might be, they might get really bad chest cold, and the cigarettes made it worse. So what she would do is literally think of the most painful, worst examples of what cigarettes did to her. And then when she would pick up that cigarette, she would have a much stronger urge not to smoke it. It would give her the will to say, no, this is bad for me. Because I think that's a good example. Cigarettes don't really offer you necessarily anything good. I still smoke cigarettes on occasion, so just full disclosure. So I am talking about something I literally still struggle with. But, some people who smoke, they use it like, oh, well, it helps me regulate my anxiety. Well, it gives me something to do while I'm having a conversation or I'm drinking a beer. There's always routines and rituals and things that go into it, and tobacco does have a grounding effect. Sure, okay. Cute, because in actuality, cigarettes kill you. They make you smell disgusting, and they do nothing positive for you but drain your bank account and harm your health. They are a disgusting, horrible, terrible habit. And I'm not being some anti-smoking person that's trying to make anybody feel bad for smoking, because as I just admitted, I still smoke. But I can also tell you there's nothing positive about cigarettes. But you can make things positive about cigarettes, especially if you're addicted to them. And really, abusers and narcissists are no different. Because while they offered you literally no benefits for being with them, you still found yourself attached and reaching for him anyway, because there was a chemical dependency, there was a trauma bond associated with them. And, like anybody who's trying to get over smoking or something, you have to be gentle with yourself, and you have to remind yourself of all the reasons that cigarettes or an abuser stinks. Literally, they stink. Well, not the abuser, maybe, but more the cigarettes, they stink. But anyway, that's a way to kind of start to reclaim memories and enjoy new settings. And I would encourage you to go to places you haven't been with your abuser, which I know there has to be some out there. I recently went on a fun trip with a friend. Now, this is a fun one, and I'm trying not to be too specific because I don't need to reveal where I live. But my roommate came to me and she said, "Oh, Jen, there's this natural spring and it's nearby. And this water is apparently like the most delicious water ever. And so delicious, people think it's even healing. And we should go get some of that water." And I'm like, "Oh, that sounds like a fun day trip. We're going to go drive out about an hour or so, 2 hours away to get some water." Now, and it was a really great day trip. And the little town it was in was kind of like walking back into the 1970s. Nothing's really changed. And it was like a tiny little shack, little room where the spring was. And, you fill up the jugs and then you drink it. And I will definitely say this. I think probably of all the water I've drank, yep, the best water I've ever drank in my life. I mean, just really delicious water. And we did that. And you know what? I never did something like that with my ex. My ex would have no interest because there was no alcohol in it. Oh, dun-dun-dun. But, it was so fun and it was refreshing. It was a great way to get out and to bond with a friend. And it didn't really cost me anything. Like, the water's like, I think, 50 cents a gallon. So the whole experience was pretty inexpensive and very enjoyable. And I got to come home with the best tasting water I'd ever had in my life. And this was just up the road, and it wasn't connected to my abuser. And while there are going to be lots of things, especially if you haven't moved, that will trigger you, to never be afraid to think outside of the box in terms of travel. And also always challenge yourself to try new things. That's going to be a big thing that's going to kickstart your happiness. Eat, pray, love, right? And the love part, well, one could argue that in the movie, she wasn't the most successful at the love stuff. In the end, she kind of figured it out. Sorry for the spoilers. But love, in some ways, is like the last step. Or there's always the love that you're trying to generate for yourself. But as far as relationships are concerned, if you are just so concerned, I find that the more self-forgiving and the more contented and at peace we are with ourselves, the far easier it is for us to find good relationships. So many people, they want the same things we want. They want to be accepted. They want to be approached with gentleness and kindness. And when we do that for ourselves, it's really easy to do that for others. And once we have strong boundaries as well, those who maybe are caustic or bitter or, lacking in civility, we need to get to a place where we no longer feel obligated to entertain it, where we no longer feel guilty for saying no to them, and also where we have the strength and the inner peace to kind of find ways to gently exit situations that don't fulfill us. And again, it always comes down to saying yes to yourself and what you need, eating and praying and loving. And as for the prayer portion, well, I do, most of what my podcast centers on is spirituality. And there is a reason that I focus a lot of my time on spiritual pursuits is because I feel like we are in really emotionally devastating levels, we're spiritually depleted, we have to reach out to something outside of ourselves. This isn't a knock against secularism or atheism or any of those things. I think it's just finding something to give us that holy moment. And I think we all know sort of what that means, but I should probably not assume and just say it. When I think of spirituality, I think of that moment where we can sit in a space and just feel connected to it. Not be in resistance, not be in our heads, but kind of just present. In that moment, I think, as we get more and more present, even if it's just taking 5-10 seconds out of our day, just to be present. That, to me, is kind of what spirituality is often about. And, also it can be listening to our inner voices and to our desires. When we pray, say to God or meditate, oftentimes we are seeking something that we feel we are lacking or that we want to grow into. And when you go out to a new place, and, having a spiritual center or having something inside of your mind that you can reach to. When you're, say, at that bridge with the butterflies, not to be egocentric or bring it to me, but I'm just using it as an example. You're at this bridge where you and your abuser, went to, and maybe this is a bad memory. Maybe he hit you, or maybe he, abandoned you, or he just found out he had cheated on you, or something like that. Or maybe it is a good memory of him being nice for once, and him. That's not important. But when you're sitting in that memory, being able to take your spiritual moment, to be present and not be in the past, not be in the future, but be in the present, and breathe in and just kind of almost extend your energy outward to feel the pulse of the life that's streaming around you. And know, because I think a lot of us struggle with this, know that you're not alone. Because in spirituality, in some ways, you're never alone. You are always, always connected to life. You are a part of life, of its tapestry. And, if you are a monotheistic person or a person that has a deistic inkling, God's always with you, or Goddess is always with you. Or your spirit guides are always with you. And that loneliness will abate, and then you can kind of feel almost this strength, this calling inside of you to reclaim this section, this bridge. And that voice, that presence of an abusive person, that abuser that, it almost killed you to get away from, it's no longer so powerful. What becomes more powerful for you is that spiritual moment, that moment where you are connected to your greater self, your highest self. And so when they talk about eat, pray, and love, I think they're really referring to just those simple acts, connecting to pleasure, connecting to your spiritual center and what's around you, and then taking the courage, because love is an act of courage to love. And loving can be a very hard step, but a very necessary one, because love is not just about loving other people. Maybe it's easy for you to care for and love other people, but it might be far more difficult for you to love yourself. Or maybe it's okay, you love yourself now, but you're still struggling with trusting other people and learning to love other people. Because oftentimes, we can end up very disappointed by our relationships. And we can have persons that we trusted and loved for years completely abandon us and completely devastate us. And that can leave marks for a long time. I know it did for me, at least. And however, we are always growing, and we are always learning about what is good for us. And there are surprisingly a lot of people out there that I believe, once you change your vibrations, will become vibrationally drawn towards you as you are to them. And when you change those vibrations to being that of wanting to be in more of a healthy, regulated, fulfilling, spiritual, intelligent, maybe, whatever those traits are that you look for in a person. When you look for that, when that's what you're looking for yourself, and that's what you'd like to converse about, you'll find it. It will come to you. I promise you that. I will 50 bazillion times promise you that. It's actually one of the reasons I am such a spiritualist, because it is remarkable about how once you make a decision, this is what I'm going to seek, this is what I am after now, that's what will come. If you hung out for years with a bunch of gossipy people, or a bunch of people that were kind of always about drama and who were kind of boring because all they seemed to know how to do was how to create conflict in their social circle to sort of have something to talk about. We all know this. We've all been to high school. Let's say that was your old scene. And maybe, when you left, all of them were like, ha ha ha, let's just swirl this drama around. And there was very little empathy about it, because that's not what the social scene was about. And you have to kind of acknowledge that that's where your vibrations were, or that was at least what you chose to interact with. Well, putting that aside is not a big deal. There are tons of people out there who are perfect for that kind of scene, and they generate their own energy and their own forms of love, and that's for them. But let's say that's no longer for you. Because the problem with those kinds of spaces is that, yeah, when you are escaping abuse or escaping something that requires space and love, empathy and connection, maturity and kindness, that's not going to be probably the social scene that's going to give you that. And so, fine, shelf that. It's not a big deal. It's technically not even a big loss because that's not what you need anymore. And relationships, I believe, are not meant to be eternal. I'm not saying that everything is transactional or temporary per se. I'm saying that we can love one another in the spaces that we are at. Find persons who share that similar space, that similar road that we're currently going down. And if there is a fork, which there's always going to be a fork at some point, in which they decide to go left, you decide to go right, it does not in any ways tarnish that relationship or diminish that relationship. It's just also an acknowledgement that there's a time and a season for everything, even when we are with the person we love. And, I'm sure with some of us, we wished that our abuser could have been at least kind in the end, much like they usually were in the beginning, that you could have just had that open and real conversation, and they could have just taken one moment to not make it about them and just be like, you know what, I am hurting you, and here I'm releasing you now. That would have been great, right? That beautiful closure point that I'm sure so many of us have fantasized about. And we all know it's complete, hokum, it's never going to happen. Because you can't change them. You can't fix them. You can't get that from them. They are disordered. They are, monstrous. Just let it go. But other relationships, you most certainly can have those closure points. And when you enter into a new chapter, it's only natural that you should also have new friendships and new relationships. And that's not something to be afraid of. That's something to celebrate and to look forward to. Because you get to have an opportunity to, just discover just how vast the human spirit and the human condition is. And just in the course of my year recovery, I have met so many wonderful people and have great friendships with many of them. Some of those friendships lasted for a year, one of them lasted for 2 years, and then there was kind of a separation point. And I think that it's completely okay to talk about. It's not a failure to recognize when a relationship has changed and turned. And with the person I recently ended a relationship with, or I'm gently exiting a relationship, because we're doing it with power, parting, and love. It reached a natural point. We were on this journey together of spirituality and of trying to be more mindful, and we love each other very dearly. But there came a point where he just decided to go in a different direction and reprioritize things that were kind of different from my own priorities. And, that can be disruptive, obviously, for anyone, especially if there are issues of mistreatment or something, oh, you lied, or, and we all do those things. There's never a point where we haven't messed up and hurt someone, whether intentionally or not. And then it's just a matter of, can you repair it? Can you not repair it? Do you want to repair it? Or have you guys reached a point where you're sort of now shifting your perspectives towards different things? And being willing to kind of look at those moments, not as failures, not as, oh, this is an indictment of your character, but more as just another example of a growing experience, another example of life and its just changeableness. To quote Percy Shelley, not may endure, but mutability. Kind of a depressing poem, but still applicable. And so when it comes to eating and then praying and then eventually, even loving, never be afraid to take those chances. Anytime I go to a new city, but I am pretty extroverted, I will admit that I have that bit of an advantage. It's not super hard for me to go into a new town or a new city and go to a kind of a social area or just meet someone on a trail or something and end up having a chat with them or end up connecting with them. I think that it comes down to confidence, and it does come down to just curiosity about other people, enjoying listening. I love listening to others kind of tell me their life circumstances and sort of what their journeys have led them to and where they came from. Spoke to a woman yesterday who was Italian and Irish, and she talked a lot about her ethnicity and a lot about the different culinary works of like Italian cuisine versus Sicilian cuisine, and New England culture versus Californian culture versus Southern culture. We had like a really fun conversation. And she also talked about being short and about working with men. Just had a nice conversation. Talked to another man from New York whose wife is right now vacationing in New Orleans. And I love interacting with people. And sometimes just in the course of just reminding yourself you're not alone, that you have just this beautiful life that you can just experience and exchange experiences with others about, it's not nearly so scary, and you don't have to feel lonely. You are always with yourself, always with God. Or if you choose to be, you can find other people. And then it's just a matter of what your boundaries are and what you want to gain from those people. And looking at our journey as we get out of abuse, I think it's always important to look at it with hope and look at it with a sense of adventure and excitement. And that will take time. When you come out of abuse, there's just going to be a natural process where you will be, unfortunately, experiencing flashbacks for a long time. I mean, you were essentially getting off of a drug in many cases, like quitting smoking. It's much the same thing. You are going to have withdrawal symptoms. And you're going to get sick. I know I got sick. I literally got sick for quite a while. Couldn't hold down food. And the process I was having flashbacks for a very long time. And that, unfortunately, is just a part of recovery. And, during that period, you'll just need to, I would suggest, go on YouTube, listen to persons like Dr. Ramani, try to gain reassurance from your loved ones, try not to ruminate, take lots of hot showers, light lots of candles, lots of these things really. There is no cure for grief and for trauma in the beginning stages in some ways. It's just going to be a part of the dope sickness, so to speak, of the duped sickness. How's that? The duped sickness. Especially if your abuser discarded you, and that's often been the case, or if you escaped your abuser, you got out, and they usually, if you do that, they retaliate very strongly. And a lot of people, because they try to hoover you, and they hoover, and they hoover, and they hoover, and they try to like really lull you back in with all these fake promises, and then you go back. Don't ever go back. If you go back after you've tried to escape, oh goodness gracious, hold on to your seat. It's going to get so rough because they will punish you. And so, but anyway, regardless of how you got out or didn't, whatever the circumstances were that led to you being at a place where hopefully you're no contact. I know for a lot of people it can be hard to be no contact. This could be because you're co-parenting, or it could just be because it's just you want to reach out. Who doesn't want to reach out to a person that you spent 5 years with, 15 years with, 10 years with, whatever the case or the number is. It's hard not to want to do that, especially since they'll probably be in your mind. The pain of what they did will be in your mind. And you'll probably feel the instinct of like wanting to call them and be like, how could you do this? Or, I remember this memory. And that can be really hard in the beginning part of grief because no contact is so essential. That is the number one step you have to make when you leave abuse. You have to be no contact. You cannot keep talking to them. They will keep traumatizing you. They will keep pulling you in. They will keep causing mayhem in your life. The only way to start healing is by not communicating with them. And I know, like, for parenting, that's difficult. And I know there's lots of techniques out there of getting around that. But I mean, for those of us maybe that aren't in that situation, and if you can, if that's available to you, no contact. And whenever you do have that moment of where you're like, man, I really want to tell this person this thing, just write it down. Just write it down, or say it to your goddesses, or say it to your spirit guides. The last thing you're going to want to do is reach out to them, because usually what you're doing is you're fantasizing about them, and you're fantasizing about their responses, because the responses will be abusive. They will just cause you to be conditioned again, to once again feel crazy. You'll get gaslit, you'll get projected onto. The same classic tactics will happen. And once you start healing, you're going to probably get cocky, and you'll think, oh, I won't allow them to gaslight me. Oh, I can see it coming now. Don't. You don't have to prove that you can call out gaslighting when they're doing it or project. It's like, congratulations, you can do that, but it's still going to happen. Just because you can name the abuse tactic doesn't mean the abuse isn't going to continue to cycle through. Like, naming the demon isn't going to change the fact that it's a demon. And so those behaviors won't stop. And so interacting with them, even if you feel like you're healed or can call it out now, or you have tools of understanding now, doesn't matter. It needs to be no contact, because that person, thank goodness, is gone. And once you're about ready to really start taking that journey, I would suggest the Eat, Pray, Love method on a budget for regular folk. And I hope it helps. And that's at least something that I've been practicing recently, and I've been trying to make my mission. Like, whenever I feel that stir craziness, or that feeling of I have to get away from my toxic situation, I try to remember the Eat, Pray, Love method and go that direction. And it does help, at least for me. And I hope it helps a little for you guys. And I hope that this has been encouraging, and that you feel like maybe this conversation will help you continue to progress forward, and you'll continue to make those strides necessary to really start to heal, recover, and pursue actual happiness, actual bliss, in lieu of what happened to you. Because this isn't about survival anymore. This is about thriving. This is about becoming the best person you could possibly be, and having happiness on a level you couldn't possibly comprehend. Because our abusers made us think that was impossible, or that we should settle for whatever they could give us, which would be like breadcrumbs, nothing. And now we have a cornucopia of awesomeness ahead of us. And it's all about keeping that mindset and remembering that you already went through hell, and you now have amazing potential and opportunity in front of you. And every day is better and a gift, because you're not with somebody who is harming you anymore. Anyway, I hope you guys have a pleasant day. You've been listening to My Little Narcissist. I'm your host, Lyra Stone. Thank you.